United Airlines Flight 976. On the night of October 19, 1995, United Airlines Flight 976 lifted off from Buenos Aires bound for New York. Among the first-class passengers sat Gerard Finneran, a wealthy Wall Street investment banker with an impressive resume, Air Force Academy graduate, Citibank veteran, and managing director at TCW. But by the time this Boeing 767 touched down at John F. Kennedy International Airport in the early hours of October 20th, Finneran wasn't remembered for his financial expertise. He became infamous for committing what many call the worst case of air rage in aviation history. Finneran had already been drinking heavily, 2 glasses of champagne before takeoff, then more red wine mid-flight. When flight attendants cut him off, he threatened one, shoved another, and even delayed medical help to a sick passenger. Things spiraled when he stormed into the first-class section, which happened to be carrying Portuguese President Mário Soares and Argentinian Foreign Minister Guido de Tella. In full view of diplomats and their security teams, Finneran climbed on a drinks cart, lowered his pants, and defecated on the floor. He then used linen napkins to wipe himself and smeared feces across the walls, tracking it on his shoes through the cabin. Food service was cancelled. The crew sprayed Karl Lagerfeld perfume in an attempt to overpower the stench. Pilots requested to divert to Puerto Rico, but authorities refused due to the presence of foreign leaders on board. The flight continued to New York, where the FBI arrested Finneran. He eventually pleaded guilty to threatening a flight attendant, received 2 years probation, a $5,000 fine, and 300 hours of community service. He also agreed to reimburse United $48,000 to cover cleaning costs and passenger refunds. The spectacle made headlines worldwide, inspired late-night comedy routines, and cemented Finneran's name in aviation infamy. Nearly 3 decades later, it remains a disturbing benchmark of how one man's arrogance, intoxication, and temper turned a routine overnight flight into a nightmarish journey at 35,000 feet. U.S. Air Flight 292. On July 6, 1996, U.S. Air Flight 292 lifted off from Savannah bound for Charlotte. On board the Boeing 737 sat a passenger who had already drawn attention before takeoff. Though he told gate agents he didn't want another drink, once in the air, he changed his mind, demanding more alcohol. When flight attendants refused, the situation turned violent in a way that stunned everyone on board. Shortly after takeoff, the man launched himself at the lead flight attendant, overpowering her and repeatedly smashing her head against the cabin wall. Crew members and passengers rushed to intervene, but he lashed out at them too, striking anyone who tried to help. In an instant, a routine short-haul flight transformed into a struggle for control inside the narrow aisle. Realizing the chaos couldn't be contained at 35,000 feet, the captain made the call to turn the aircraft back to Savannah. Law enforcement was waiting at the gate, and the man was taken into custody the moment the plane touched down. The decision to return saved the crew from further harm, but cost the airline both time and money. In court, the passenger pleaded guilty to interfering with a flight crew. The sentence was severe: 4 years and 3 months in prison, 200 hours of community service, mandatory drug and alcohol testing, and an order to reimburse U.S. Air for the cost of the diversion. The exact figure wasn't disclosed, but diversions often run into tens of thousands of dollars in fuel, crew time, and delays. This incident, though less sensational than others marked by outrageous behavior, stands out for its sheer brutality. A flight attendant's head bashed against a wall, a cabin full of terrified passengers, and an airline forced to ground its journey, all because one intoxicated man can't handle being cut off from alcohol. Southwest Airlines Flight 700. On May 23, 2021, a routine Southwest Airlines flight from Sacramento to San Diego turned into one of the most violent passenger incidents in recent memory. As the aircraft began its final descent, a flight attendant moved through the cabin with the usual requests: seatbelts fastened, tray table stowed, masks secured. For most passengers, these instructions signaled the end of the journey. For 29-year-old Viviana Quinones, it was the spark that ignited chaos. Instead of complying, Quinones pulled out her phone and began recording. Within moments, she shoved the attendant, stood up, and delivered a brutal attack, punching her in the face and head with a closed fist and yanking her hair. The blows left the flight attendant with 3 chipped teeth, 2 requiring crowns, as well as stitches under her left eye. Bloodied and stunned, she was shielded by nearby passengers, one of whom shouted, "Don't you dare touch a flight attendant like that," as the assault was captured on video. The consequences were swift and severe. Quinones pleaded guilty to interference with a flight crew. A federal judge in San Diego sentenced her to 15 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, during which she is banned from flying. She was also ordered to complete anger management counseling, pay $26,000 in restitution, and a $7,500 fine. Federal officials seized on the case as a warning. Attacks on flight crew members will not be tolerated, declared U.S. Attorney Randy Grossman. The FBI echoed the sentiment, noting the sentence should send a very strong message. Her outburst came at a volatile moment. In 2021, airlines reported over 5,000 unruly passenger incidents, most tied to mask mandates, with nearly 300 involving intoxication. By mid-2022, the FAA had already logged 1,419 new reports. Quinones's case became a symbol of how pandemic air tensions pushed air travel to dangerous extremes. American Flight 1774. On July 7, 2021, a business-class passenger turned an American Airlines flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Charlotte into one of the most notorious cases of air rage in U.S. aviation history. Her name was Heather Wells, a 34-year-old from San Antonio, and what began with a glass of whiskey spiraled into chaos at 30,000 feet. An hour into the trip, Wells demanded to leave the plane, dropped to her knees in the aisle, and crawled toward other passengers while speaking incoherently. When approached by a flight attendant, she snapped, threatening to hurt him if he didn't move. Moments later, she lunged at the cabin door, screaming and spewing profanity as crew members rushed to stop her. In the struggle, she struck one attendant in the head multiple times before being dragged back to a seat. It took duct tape, flex cuffs, and even taping her mouth shut to restrain her. Yet she continued kicking, spitting, and attempting to bite anyone nearby. When law enforcement boarded in Charlotte, Wells broke the seat in front of her and had to be sedated before removal. The Federal Aviation Administration responded with the largest fine in its history, $81,950. That figure broke down into $45,000 for violence against crew and passengers, $27,950 for trying to open the cabin door, and $9,000 for interfering with crew duties. Wells later blamed mental health struggles, apologizing publicly and admitting she felt irrational fear mid-flight. Yet the FAA made her case a cornerstone of its zero-tolerance policy, rolled out after a surge of nearly 6,000 unruly passenger incidents in 2021. By 2023, those numbers had dropped to 2,075, with 915 cases reported so far this year. Her story remains the most expensive warning in the sky, threatens safety on board, and the cost may reach nearly $82,000. Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines' flight from Las Vegas to Atlanta in July 2021 was supposed to be routine. But what unfolded in the cabin of Delta Airlines turned into one of the most disturbing passenger incidents in recent history. It started when a woman seated next to a fellow traveler made an unsettling attempt to hug and kiss him. When he resisted, her behavior spiraled from awkward to aggressive in a matter of moments. A flight attendant stepped in, hoping to calm the situation, but instead the confrontation escalated. The woman shouted, demanded to be taken off the flight, and stormed down the aisle, forcing the pilot to request security support through Atlanta Air Traffic Control. The tension hit its breaking point when she suddenly attacked another passenger, biting him multiple times and leaving the cabin in panic. The crew rushed to restrain her, moving her to the back of the aircraft in a desperate attempt to stop the violence. For the next 3 hours, the flight carried on under a cloud of fear until the plane finally touched down in Atlanta, where security and FAA officials were waiting at the gate. The aftermath was swift. The Federal Aviation Administration deemed her actions a grave threat to flight safety and imposed a staggering $77,272 fine. The penalties included failing to follow crew instructions and physically assaulting another passenger. This was not just a fine. It ranked among the largest ever handed down in U.S. aviation history. The FAA's message was clear. Disruptive behavior at 30,000 feet comes with consequences that reach tens of thousands of dollars. In an era where passenger misconduct had already forced airlines into a zero-tolerance policy, this case stood out as one of the most expensive lessons ever delivered in the skies. Continental Airlines Flight 1837. On June 14, 1997, Continental Airlines Flight 1837 from Houston to Los Angeles turned into one of the most notorious cases of mid-air chaos in U.S. aviation history. What began as a dispute over a denied first-class upgrade spiraled into threats, violence, and fear at 30,000 feet. The confrontation was led by 36-year-old Thomas C. Casper of Santa Barbara and 28-year-old Susan K. Callahan of Goleta. Witnesses recalled them running and crawling down the aisle, yelling and disrupting the entire cabin. Casper escalated the situation when he claimed there were people on board with guns and bombs who would open the cabin doors. Then, in a shocking act of aggression, he doused a flight attendant with scalding coffee, leaving her with second-degree burns on her hand that required hospital treatment. Callahan proved equally dangerous. Furious and unrestrained, She kicked at the cockpit door with such force that she damaged it, all while shouting that she had a gun and demanding entry. Her actions threatened to breach the very space that must remain secure at all costs. By the time Flight 1837 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, authorities were waiting. Both passengers were immediately arrested and charged with interference with the flight crew, a serious federal offense. Prosecutors also added local charges including battery with great bodily injury and possession of narcotics after drugs were found in their possession. The judge set their bond at $50,000 each, underscoring the severity of their crimes. While their original grievance centered on being denied first-class seating, the consequences of their actions went far beyond entitlement. This case became a landmark example of how quickly rage in the sky can escalate into genuine danger, forcing the justice system to send a clear message. Reckless behavior aboard an aircraft carries devastating personal and legal costs. American Airlines Flight 38. On January 19, 2022, American Airlines Flight 38, a Boeing 777 with 129 passengers and 14 crew members, lifted off from Miami bound for London. An hour into the flight, the journey came to a halt over a single defiant act. A passenger refused to wear a mask. The dispute left the cabin with no choice but to turn the jet back to Miami. The decision was costly and disruptive, but protocol was clear. A passenger unwilling to comply with the federal mask mandate could not be allowed to continue on an international route. Upon landing, law enforcement met the aircraft at the gate. The passenger, identified as a woman, was escorted off by Miami-Dade police officers without resistance. American Airlines responded swiftly, banning her from future flights pending an international investigation. The incident was isolated. It was part of a staggering surge in unruly passenger behavior across the U.S. aviation system. In 2021, the FAA logged 5,981 reports of disruptive passengers, with over 71% linked directly to mask disputes. Some altercations escalated into violence. In one shocking case that October, an American Airlines flight attendant was hospitalized after a passenger allegedly struck her in the face, forcing an emergency diversion. Flight 38's abrupt reversal served as a reminder of how one refusal could impact hundreds of lives. The hours lost, the emotional stress on passenger and crew, and the operational cost to the airline underscored the broader crisis airlines were facing. In an industry already strained by the pandemic, these cases highlighted the fragile balance between public safety, federal mandates, and passenger compliance. For American Airlines, the message was firm. Disruption would not be tolerated, whether the trigger was a seatbelt, a drink, or in this case, a mask. Frontier Airlines flight. On a summer night in August 2021, passengers aboard a Frontier Airlines flight from Philadelphia to Miami witnessed one of the most chaotic scenes to ever unfold in midair. The spotlight fell on 22-year-old Maxwell Berry, who turned a 3-hour trip into a viral spectacle after a string of outbursts that combined arrogance, aggression, and alcohol. The trouble started when Berry spilled a drink on his shirt, disappeared into the lavatory, and reemerged shirtless. A crew member helped him find a clean top, but his behavior escalated quickly. Over the next 15 minutes, he wandered the cabin, boasting that his parents were worth more than $2 million and shouting that his grandfather was an attorney. His arrogance soon turned violent. Berry allegedly groped 2 female flight attendants before taking a swing at a male attendant, igniting a physical confrontation that spiraled out of control. The crew had little choice. With limited tools at their disposal, they restrained him using duct tape, securing him to his seat as passengers erupted in laughter and recorded the scene. One clip posted on Twitter by an ABC reporter racked up 9.7 million views and was shared more than 40,000 times, including by Berry himself, who claimed he was treated like livestock. His pleas for help, muffled by tape across his mouth, were met with mocking cheers from fellow travelers. When the flight landed in Miami, Berry was arrested and charged with 3 counts of battery. Police confirmed he had been drinking heavily. His actions added to an alarming trend that year. The FAA logged 3,271 reports of unruly passengers in just 6 months, with fines ranging from $7,500 to $21,500, totaling more than $682,000. For Frontier's crew, duct tape wasn't just improvisation. It became the last line of defense against a passenger who crossed every boundary. United Airlines Flight 933. On a February evening in 2020, United Airlines Flight 933 from Frankfurt to Virginia turned into a tense airborne standoff when 27-year-old Dana Ghazi Mustafa was caught smoking in the aircraft's lavatory. What began as a violation of the no smoking rule spiraled into a violent confrontation that stretched across the 9-hour journey. Mustafa, allegedly intoxicated and carrying a half-empty 1-liter bottle of Absolute vodka, threatened chaos that few on board would ever forget. Crew members first encountered her after a smoke detector went off in the bathroom. Once returned to her seat, she became visibly upset, at one point fabricating a tragic story about losing her family to a drunk driver. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Witnesses reported she punched a seat-back television, hurled a coin, and was later seen walking through the cabin striking the flint of a lighter. Attempts to restrain her only made things worse. She allegedly shoved a flight attendant, tried to lock herself in a toilet, and lashed out at federal air marshals, striking one in the shins. The turning point came when she began shouting threats. "I'm going to stab everyone on this plane, then kill myself." According to court documents, she repeated that she wanted to punch and stab the marshals seated beside her. Authorities confiscated both a lighter and a burned cigarette from her belongings. When the plane finally landed at Dulles International Airport, Mustafa was taken into custody. During questioning, she admitted her earlier story about a fatal car crash had been fabricated. The Justice Department confirmed she faced charges that could lead up to 8 years in prison, though sentences are typically shorter. What was meant to be an uneventful transatlantic flight became a vivid reminder of how quickly disorder at 35,000 feet can threaten hundreds of lives.